Hello and welcome to CIS 4510, IT Project Management. In this session we will address initiation as the first phase of project management. The initiation phase will include developing project scope. It will also include requirement gathering and analysis. In addition, it will include assumptions, risks, and constraints. And we'll talk about each one of these things separately. So as we stated before, the project lifecycle is constructed of four processes: the initiation, the planning, the execution, and the closure. And as shown in the figure, the project lifecycle is associated with the monitoring and controlling process, which spreads across all the processes. Although these phases are completed sequentially, they might overlap in some project situations. For example, in the case of a change in the project scope during the execution, a new plan has to be developed to address that change. And most likely, the changes at the beginning will be easy to encounter, while if you are in more into the project, it will be harder to replan or redo for the project. It will be more expensive also, and it will be hard to accomplish. So always it's better to do the changes at the beginning to make sure that the requirements for the project and requirements for the stakeholders being captured correctly, so you don't have to do any changes later on. Actually, we can claim that the execution starts from the time you start the initiation, because you are developing the proper communication, and you are initiating meetings, and you started the analysis for the project and the execution, the initial execution for the project. So also the execution can be started from the beginning in some cases. In the first phase, the team will look at the organization current situation and identify the information technology needs. If I have in my company, I have a need for a server workstations. If I have a need for networking capabilities, extra switches, extra routers. If I need software installation, software configuration. If I need to develop special software that's needed or required just for the organization, all these IT projects could be considered. And at that point, the current situation has to be evaluated, and all these needs has to be documented. If we have an IT team in-house, then the team will start identifying and gathering organization requirements, and to document the requirements, the team will use what's called the project scope. The project scope will define the boundaries and limitation of the work. You will state in that scope what will be done and what will not be done within the project. If the scope of the project beyond the capabilities of the organization or the IT department in the organization, then a request for proposal will be developed to solicit proposals from external contractors. And that's called outsourcing. So either I can do it in-house, or I can outsource it to another IT contractor organization that will do the job for me. The project scope is a high-level description of the features and functions that characterize the project, which includes project goals and objectives. In addition, the project scope document should include assumptions, constraints, and associated risk. Whether an external contractor or the organization's IT department accepted to do the work, a charter document should be developed to confirm project boundaries, limitation, risks, assumptions, and constraints. And this is from the other side of the organization, which is the contractor or the IT department, where in this document they will confirm exactly what need to be done and what will not be done within that project. That's why we are saying that limitation and boundaries. The charter document will also include the proposed budget and the project duration, and once it's confirmed, the document will be signed for approval and the project will move on. From the contractor side, when selecting a project to execute, the contractor must perform a feasibility analysis to ensure the proper outcome. The analysis will compare different alternatives or solutions for the organization IT requirements. In some cases, the cost might be high, but can be justified by the benefits of implementing and executing the project. For example, implementing a new medical records system in a hospital with more efficiency and higher security measures. It might be expensive and might not give a return on investment until 5 years, 10 years from now, but at the same time it's giving the hospital more efficiency in working and providing customer care or health care for the patients. The stakeholders, how do we know the stakeholders? The stakeholders are the customers or users, the sponsor, the project manager, project team, functional manager, operations manager, seller or business partner. Basically, it's all entities that are involved in the project or has an interest in this project. The stakeholder interest should be defined what each person or each entity has an interest in within the project, and their feedback about what they need should be documented during the requirement identification. By doing this, then any conflict between the different stakeholders will be resolved before starting the project, and an agreement will be reached between the different parties involved. Once we know all the stakeholders, then we can divide them into two major groups: the primary stakeholders and the secondary stakeholders. The primary stakeholders are the people or the organization or the entities that ultimately affect or affected by the project. The secondary stakeholders are the intermediaries that will be processing, maybe delivering, maybe assisting in the project delivery or executing the project. In this case, or as I said before, we will have potential supporters and opponents for the project and for the different activities within the project, and we need to identify these problems. We need to identify the supporters and opponents, and we need to find a middle ground between both parties and make sure that we resolve our conflicts. In the analysis part of the stakeholders, what we can do, we can ask some questions to make sure that we are capturing the stakeholders' feedback. And the type of questions, those are just suggestions here that I added in this slide, but again, it depends on the company and it depends on the management and the need to collect certain information. So what are the stakeholder expectations of the project? You need to know that. You need to know the benefits for the different stakeholders or for each entity. What resources will the stakeholders wish to commit or avoid committing to the project? If they need to commit with a certain amount of money, then they have to specify it, and it has to be done within the duration of the project or within certain time. If they have resources of people, then the people or the facility or whatever they committed with, or they want to commit with, then they have to at a certain point provide it to the project. If they are not committing, then they will state that in the document that we will not be committing any of our resources to solve the problem or to participate in the project outcome. What other interests does the stakeholders have which may conflict with the project or with other entities or other stakeholders? And this is again, this is something that need to be resolved before you start the execution, because you don't want to start the execution and find a problem in the middle of that, and any changes will affect the project. You have to replan, you have to make sure that you are covering everything. So it's not easy to make the change in the middle or towards the end, but it's very easy to make all these changes and agree on common ground at the beginning of the project. The IT requirements are customer needs that are delivered as a solution to a specific IT problem. Requirements, we are saying requirements, that means things that should be discovered before starting to fully design, build, or execute a project. Whether they are product related or project related requirements, we need to identify all these. What do I need to do, or what do I need to have like information, knowledge, or resources, or money, or time to finish this project properly and deliver it as requested. The requirements could be functional requirements that's related to the different functionalities within the IT. For example, if I'm looking for software development, then I'm looking at the different functionalities within that software, what functions or features the stakeholders or the customer is looking for. The same if I'm adding a web server. What are you looking to see in the web server? What kind of information will be published on the web? Do you need forms? Do you need sign-in? Do you need membership? All this information should be collected, and this is called functional requirements. The non-functional requirements, it specifies criteria that can be used to judge the operation of a system. So we have the functional and we have the non-functional. We have also other requirements that will be on a global level that might affect the company's communication with the global world and with other companies within the either national or international respect. Then we have the product or project constraints, the limitations of the project, or we can say the boundaries that will chain or limit me from doing certain things. And the requirements breakdown structure assist in understanding exactly what's needed, so we can propose the project goal and solution with different requirements from 1 to n, and each requirement will have function and non-functional. For the functional, it will have sub-function, and each sub-function will have certain features that we are looking for. So again, we can break it down graphically like this in graphic design or graphic representation that will assist me in understanding the requirements and confirming that with the stakeholders to make sure that I'm covering everything. The methods for requirements gathering, we have lots of methods to do. We can do facilitated group sessions where we can sit with different groups and gather the information from them. It has strengths, but at the same time it has certain risks that is associated with that. The same with the prototypes. We can create prototypes that we can assist in understanding the outcome of the project, and then clarify what will be the requirements to accomplish or to reach to that prototype. And we have interviews. We can make interviews with the different entities involved or different stakeholders to capture their feedback or their need or the requirements that they think should be in the system. We can also observe, and in many cases you will see that you need just to go in the organization and observe the different processes and recommend for them what they need as an IT manager or as an IT professional, because sometimes, most of the time, they don't know exactly what they need. So as an IT professional, you will go watch what they're doing and recommend for them the proper software or system or hardware needed to accomplish their work. In addition, we can use requirements reuse. We look at what they have right now, and we can reuse some of what they have to facilitate the proper implementation of the project. If not, then we can add more requirements as needed. So we reuse what's available and recommend for new changes as needed. For the business process analysis, we look at the different processes within the business. We look at the different activities, and we document each and every process with the resources that's been committed for that process and what is missing, where is the gap. Based on that, recommendation will be made to cover the gap or to close the gap and make sure that everything being done efficiently. Also, you can use use case scenario, and with the use case scenario, you can document the system, the current system, and the different scenarios that that system might face, and how to overcome these problems. The requirements attributes, we look always at complete documentation of the requirements, that they are clear and they are valid, they can be measurable, they can be tested to make sure that it's being done correctly, it can be maintained after that. We should look at the maintainability. We should look at the reliability of the system that should be implemented, and the look and feel of that system or the requirements, the feasibility of the requirements, the precedent, the scale, the stability, the performance, safety, and specifications. And in each case, we can ask certain questions that will be related. And those are a list of examples for some questions that can be asked to make sure that you are capturing the each attribute correctly, or that you are covering these attributes as needed. We said part of what we do is the risk and capturing the risk. So how do we do that? What is risk? Risk includes a quick assessment of the significance of each risk, which is the probability and effect on the project or the execution of the project. And it's important to note that this initial risk assessment does not replace the full risk assessment conducted during the planning phase. It's a high-level risk that doesn't have any details. So in the planning phase, you go deep into details and start looking for a specific risk within the project. Once you do that, then you have to develop a plan for mitigation, the different alternatives that can be implemented at that point, and how to implement it, how to do it within time and within budget. The risk management life cycle, the way that we do it, we start with risk identification, then risk assessment, then risk mitigation, and risk monitoring and control to see once I implemented the solution, what happened, was it successful, or do I need to take additional steps to make sure that it's done. And to do that, always in the management process, we have certain questions that we need to ask. So we can ask what are the risks, and this is the identification. What's the probability of loss that results from them, which is the outcome or the result of that risk happening. How much are the losses likely to cost, the cost associated with it. What might the losses be if the worst happen. So we are looking at the worst case scenario to make sure that we are covering all different scenarios, everything that might happen, and what are the different solutions that can be implemented to mitigate the risk, and how can the losses be reduced or eliminated, and then will the alternatives produce other risks. Sometimes when you implement one of the solutions, you will see that it produces another risk that might affect the project progress, so you need to know all this information before you start ahead. So for the risk identification, we look at technical risks, we look at project management risks, and we look at organizational risks and external risks, especially if I'm using contractors, or maybe I'm using different resources from outside, then I have external risks that might be associated with the project. So all these risks has to be identified and captured to make sure that I'm covering all the kinds of risks that might be associated with the project. But again, this is a high-level identification of risk. Additional detailed risk analysis should be done within the planning phase. With the risk assessment, we start asking about the probability of that risk happening, and what will be the effect of that risk on the project, and how much would it cost to have that risk in the project. Then for the risk mitigation, when we start asking for the different alternatives or solutions that are available to mitigate the risk, and we usually have some options. Can we accept the risk? Can we avoid it to begin with? Do we have a contingency plan? Can we solve it permanently or eliminate? Can we transfer it to an organization outside where that organization is very experienced in solving such problems, and then they can mitigate for us, or they can take the burden off our shoulders by mitigating that risk or dealing with that risk. And again, the alternatives reduce an additional risks that we need to consider. For risk monitoring and control, during that time with the identification, assessment, and mitigation, we are documenting everything in a log file that will be always reviewed, and making sure that we are implementing the risk analysis and the mitigation in the proper way, or the solution in the proper way. So everything is being monitored, everything is being controlled, making sure that the risk being identified and covered, and an alternative solution being implemented. For the assumptions, what kind of assumptions are we looking for? What are assumptions? And assumptions are considered the factors that are, for the planning purposes, considered to be true, real, or certain, but without including proof. So you are assuming something, but you don't have the proof that it might happen or it will happen, but you are assuming that this is correct or this is the right thing to do. During the planning process, these assumptions will be validated to make sure that yes, that now it was assumption, now it's true, and I need to deal with it. If any assumptions are inaccurate or inconsistent, will be eliminated. The others that will be validated will be dealt with, or will identify the effect of that on the project scope, timeline, and cost, and will be dealt with based on that. They can be moved at that point. If those assumptions has a bad effect on the project, they might be moved to the risk area and be dealt with as a risk that should be mitigated or eliminated. Constraints. Constraints are the restrictions or limitation or place conditions on the project, especially those associated with project scope, such as the deadlines, the predetermined budget, set milestones, contract provisions, or privacy or security considerations. All these are considered constraints that limits the project, making sure that it's within certain boundaries. These constraints can come from external factors such as social, it could be environmental, it could be political, economical, and could be technological constraints or sources of constraints. Also, constraints can come from internal factors such as the limitation of resources that we have, limitations of the expertise or the skills required for the execution of the project, maybe legal requirements, having certain rules, policies that I need to add to the company. Maybe I have a limitation with the facility that needs to be used to execute the project. I don't have enough facilities, so I have to maybe use a contractor or a different place to do that. In order to identify constraints, it's necessary to analyze the project environment and all the factors that are affecting the project to make sure that we are capturing them all. The requirements document will include the scope, general requirements. It will include specific requirements in addition to what we said, risk assumptions and constraints. Now, with the final draft that will be submitted to the upper management for approval, it will include everything. It will include even the cost and the timeline to execute the project. This document that's been approved, it has all the things that's been documented, will serve as an input for the planning phase to plan properly for the different activities and different resources needed to accomplish the project goal. So now we know everything needed, we solve all the conflicts, we know the risks, we know the budget, we know the timeline. Now we start planning on how to do that with the planning phase. So for the initiation phase, that will be all. If you have any questions, you can email it to me, or you can actually Skype with me if you would like, and I would be more than glad to answer your questions. Thank you and have a great day.